My name is Mike, and this happened last year when my fiancé and I bought our first starter home together. We're an Asian couple, which is relevant to the story. It was a small two-story house on a basic suburban street in Georgia. There was nothing remarkable about it, but to us it was meant to be special. A quiet street, a decent backyard, a cheap fence, and regular-looking houses all in a row. We felt fortunate to buy a house at our age, so it was a very exciting point in our lives that was quite literally stolen from us, as you'll soon understand. The first few days were normal. We unpacked, met a few neighbors, and tried to settle in. The neighbor on our right was a friendly older couple, and the man across the street waved and came over to introduce himself. But the house on our left was different. We didn't see anyone come out for days. The curtains were always shut. It looked clean and normal, but always dark inside, as if no one was home, even with a car in the driveway. The only sign of life was one afternoon when we noticed someone standing inside their front window. My fiancée and I were carrying groceries when she whispered to me about it. I looked over and saw a man half visible behind the curtain, clearly watching us. He didn't wave, and as soon as we glanced his way, he walked away from the window. It was strange, but we shrugged it off. Some people are just quiet or awkward. Over the next week, we noticed him more often, never outside, but always inside his house. I'd catch him in the living room window when leaving for work. My fiancée saw him in an upstairs window while getting the mail. Each time he seemed to be watching us, but the moment we looked back, he was gone. One night, something happened that left us deeply uneasy. Around midnight, as I passed our upstairs bedroom window, which faced his house directly, I saw him in his own upstairs window. This time, he wasn't partly hidden. He was fully visible, standing straight with his face turned toward our room. I froze, unsure if I was seeing correctly, but the instant he realized I'd spotted him, he stepped back into the darkness. I remember laughing it off to my fiancée, saying, "Oh, great. Our neighbor's a creep." The next morning, the man came to our door, the first time we'd seen him outside. He knocked politely, introduced himself as Gordon, and apologized for seeming to spy the night before, claiming he'd been placing something on his windowsill and hadn't meant to look into our room. He smiled the whole time, a seemingly welcoming smile that offered some relief. I didn't instantly like him. There was something slightly off, but I accepted the apology to be polite. A week later, something else happened that we couldn't ignore. In the middle of the night, my fiancée shook me awake, saying she heard someone in the yard. Half asleep, I got up to check. When I looked out, I saw a person walking in our yard, a full-grown man moving as if searching for something. I shouted, "Hey!" and the figure hurried toward the gate, slamming it behind him. Since we had nothing in the backyard yet besides gardening tools, I assumed it wasn't a robbery and didn't investigate further, though we both felt uneasy. A few nights later, it happened again. We heard rustling like someone fiddling with a lock. I looked out and saw someone in the yard once more. This time my whole body tensed. I yelled that I was calling the police. The person walked out and slammed the gate, but I saw enough of his face and posture to recognize Gordon. I shouted his name, but he didn't respond, just walked away calmly. This time, I went outside, checked the yard, and then marched to Gordon's house and knocked. He answered within seconds, already awake, and smiled while laughing off the incident. He said he'd been chasing kids who jumped fences in the neighborhood and claimed they'd been moving from his yard to ours. He said it happens all the time and I'd get used to it. He kept smiling, but it felt unnatural, like something dark was behind it. I swear I saw hate in his eyes. I didn't argue, just said I understood and went home, but deep down I didn't believe him. The next day, he invited us over for Chinese food that Friday, hoping to ease the tension. We agreed, thinking it might make things cordial. We went to his house around 7 p.m. that Friday, and the atmosphere felt uncomfortable from the moment we stepped in. Gordon seemed intoxicated and grew more drunk as he sipped wine. He mentioned ordering Chinese food and made a weird comment like, "I know you guys love Chinese food," then laughed. He dropped passive-aggressive remarks throughout the evening. When the food arrived, we offered to help set the table, but he almost yelled in refusal. The dinner grew increasingly tense as he drank more, and his comments turned from passive to openly rude. He made it clear he didn't like that an Asian couple had moved into the neighborhood. At first we tried to ignore it, but he grew louder and angrier, ranting about the town's history and saying things that made us feel truly unsafe. Then he admitted it had been him in our backyard those nights. He didn't deny it or try to hide it. The climax came when he shouted that we weren't welcome and the neighborhood wasn't for people like us. At that point, we didn't say a word. We stood up and left, walking back to our house as fast as possible. We didn't even discuss it until we were inside with the doors locked. Unsure what else to do, we went to the other neighbors, going door to door to ask about Gordon. Some were shocked by our story. Others weren't surprised at all. A few told us Gordon was a drunk whose wife left him years ago. It didn't comfort us. We were living right next to him. After that, we tried to avoid him. No looking at his house, no going outside unless necessary. But how long can you avoid your next-door neighbor? Every night felt tense, like he could be watching or trespassing again. Then one night, a brick came crashing through our downstairs window, shattering glass across the living room. We jumped out of bed. When I ran downstairs, the brick was on the floor with no note. We knew it was Gordon. There was no one else it could be, but we had no proof. We filed a police report. Officers spoke to him, but he denied everything, acting confused and claiming innocence. The police could only document the incident. We discussed installing cameras and staying to fight, but we were already too scared and mentally exhausted. We both felt something worse would happen if we stayed. Less than 2 months after moving in, we started packing again. We couldn't live next to someone who hated us, who had entered our yard at night and thrown a brick through our window. Before leaving, we filed another report detailing everything. The police said they'd monitor the situation, but we didn't feel protected. We moved out of that house and that neighborhood as fast as we could, leaving behind the home we thought would be our first chapter together. I still believe if we'd stayed, you might have eventually heard about us on the news, victims of this man. I wish it weren't illegal to dox people. I'd love to share his address. All we can do now is move on and upward from here. This story happened a couple of years ago, around late 2021. My name is Noah, and my fiancée Gabby, who is now my wife, had moved into a new house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a nice 2-story place, perfect for our future family, and the neighbors seemed friendly and welcoming. The couple to our right seemed the friendliest of all, Daniel and Veronica, a pair in their late 30s who seemed like genuinely sweet people. They even baked us a red velvet cake as a welcoming gift, which was delicious, and we thanked them warmly. The first few weeks were good and peaceful until we started noticing strange things with Daniel and Veronica. One night around 11 p.m., I heard shouting outside. Looking from our bedroom window, I realized it was coming from their house, like they were having an argument. I couldn't see them due to the angle, but eventually I watched Veronica storm out to her car and drive away. After that, it was quiet again. I told Gabby, and we chalked it up to a marital spat, with Veronica leaving to cool off. I was a little concerned since they seemed so pleasant, but every couple disagrees sometimes, so we didn't think much of it. Later that same week, as Gabby and I were returning home, we heard yelling from inside their house again. Their main door was open, with only the storm door closed, so we could hear them arguing clearly. Again, we ignored it, figuring it wasn't our business. Then, one day, I noticed Veronica's car wasn't there for a few days. I assumed she might be on a trip, since Daniel's car remained and I'd see him occasionally. But then it became a week, then 2 weeks, and her car was still gone. My wife noticed too and wondered if they divorced, which would make sense given the arguments. But the way she left felt sudden. One day her car was there, the next it was gone. Daniel started acting strangely, avoiding us, not waving like before. On the rare occasions I talked to him, he'd speak quickly and cut the conversation short, as if he were nervous. Something was definitely off. After 3 weeks of Veronica's absence, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to ask Daniel how things were going, despite Gabby arguing it wasn't our business. I rang his doorbell, knowing he was home because his car was there. It took him almost 3 minutes to answer, and when he did, he looked off, sweating heavily, with a weird, forced smile, like he was hiding something. I asked about Veronica and why I hadn't seen her. He hesitated, then said, She just want to stay with her mom out of state because she's very sick and needs looking after. It felt like a lie, especially with how he was acting. When I asked about the sweating, he said he'd been working out upstairs. He spoke rapidly, seeming rushed and nervous, and then something happened that made my heart drop. I heard a voice scream from somewhere inside the house. It was unmistakably a woman yelling for help. I asked what that was, and Daniel quickly said, "Oh, I'm playing a movie upstairs and forgot to pause it." That made no sense, given he just said he was working out. I just said okay and told him I'd catch him later. I went home and told Gabby everything. She was as concerned as I was and insisted I call the police. I did, requesting to stay anonymous, even though Daniel would probably guess it was me. I told the dispatcher I'd heard something disturbing and requested a welfare check. About 10 minutes later, an officer arrived, followed soon by 5 police cars and an ambulance. Gabby and I rushed outside to see officers everywhere. Daniel was taken away in handcuffs while Veronica was rushed to the ambulance on a stretcher. We later learned they'd been in an abusive relationship that had escalated horribly. Daniel had kept her locked in the basement for weeks. I hadn't even known they had one. He had assaulted, raped, and abused her, even selling her car to make it seem she was gone. The scream I heard happened because he had stabbed her 5 times for making noise while he answered the door. That explained his strange behavior. Tragically, Veronica didn't survive and passed away a couple of hours later. As Daniel was being escorted to a police car, he locked eyes with me and said, "I know it was you who snitched on me, and you'll regret this." I wanted to laugh it off, given he'd be behind bars for a long time, but the situation was too messed up. It's crazy how you never know who people truly are behind closed doors. Daniel and Veronica had seemed like a friendly, normal couple, but obviously there were serious issues hidden underneath. Fast forward a couple of nights after the incident. I woke up in the middle of the night to a dark room and saw the silhouette of a person. As my eyes adjusted, I realized it was Daniel. My heart dropped. He said, "I told you you would regret this," and he was holding a knife. I tried to talk him down, urging him to calm down and just talk, but he didn't respond. I pressed myself against the headboard, and then, out of nowhere, he lunged at me. I screamed, and then I woke up for real. I was breathing heavily, with Gabby asleep beside me. She asked what was wrong, and I said it was just a bad dream. She went back to sleep, but I couldn't. The fact that I dreamed about my neighbor, a man who murdered his wife, breaking into my house to kill me chills me to this day. Most dreams fade, but this one stayed vivid, and the words he said in the dream were the exact ones he'd spoken while being taken away in cuffs. I never told my wife about this dream. I guess I worried she'd think I was crazy or it would just stress her out. Eventually, after we got married, we moved to another part of town. It's a nice, quiet neighborhood and a great house, but the whole event traumatized us. Knowing we lived next to a murderer still haunts us. My name is Devin, and this happened 2 years ago when I was 24, living in a duplex in Queens, New York. It was a small, old house split right down the middle. I rented the left side while a man I never met or even saw rented the right. The landlord said he kept to himself and worked nights, which didn't concern me initially. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, sharing a wall with what I assumed was his bedroom. Sometimes if I pressed my ear to the wall, I could hear faint movements from the other side, but that's expected in New York City. The first week was uneventful. I worked long hours, came home tired, ate something simple, and went straight to bed, just happy to have my own place. Then one night, things began. I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when I heard what sounded like a man talking, but his voice was unnaturally high-pitched, like someone putting on a fake voice. It was faint, coming from the other room, but the wall was so thin it felt like he was standing right next to me. I couldn't make out the words, just weird, high-pitched mumbling. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe he was on the phone or watching TV. Eventually, it stopped and I fell asleep. A few nights later, the mumbling returned, louder and more distinct. I pressed my ear lightly to the wall and listened. It didn't sound like a phone conversation, more like he was talking to himself. I didn't know whether to laugh or be creeped out. To block the noise, I pulled the blanket over my head, needing sleep for an early work morning. That was the first night I truly felt uneasy living there alone. 2 weeks later, the knock started. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard two taps on the wall right next to my head, so close I flinched as if touched. I sat up and waited in silence, and then there were two more identical taps from the other side. I knew it wasn't the house settling. This was deliberate. I rolled away from the wall and sat there shaking, waiting to hear more, but it went quiet. I wanted to knock back, but feared acknowledging it would make things worse. The next morning, I told myself I was overreacting. Over the following week, the knocks continued. Sometimes soft, sometimes harder, always at night when I was trying to sleep. One night, it went on so long I put on headphones and turned on a loud fan. I lay awake thinking about how thin the wall was, how close he was, literally just 2 feet away from me. It scared me more each night, though I try to rationalize it as accidental banging. Then came the night everything changed, one I'll never forget. I was lying in bed on my side, facing the wall, eyes closed but not yet asleep, with only streetlight filtering through the blinds. I heard 3 slow knocks. I kept my eyes closed, trying not to react, when that same high-pitched voice came through the wall, muffled but clear enough. He said, "What are you doing in there?" My lungs locked up. I sat straight up in bed, shaking so hard my teeth felt like they were chattering. This was no longer accidental. He was acknowledging me directly, speaking as if he knew I was right there. I grabbed my phone and called my boyfriend, whispering that I was scared out of my mind. He said he was coming over right away to stay the night. I sat with the lights on until he arrived. The rest of the night, nothing happened, which felt almost worse, as if the neighbor knew I wasn't alone. For a few days, things were quiet. I started wondering if I'd misheard or it was some strange coincidence. But then, a few nights later, something happened that made me run from the house, an experience I still have bad dreams about. I was fully asleep this time when something snapped me awake. I sat up slightly, and then the knocks started again like someone drumming their fingers right beside my head. Without thinking, I screamed back, shouting for whoever it was to leave me alone. I was shaking and breathing hard, adrenaline surging from mustering the courage to yell. What happened next, I never expected in a million years. A voice, not from a wall but from inside my room, said, "Go to sleep." It was deeper and closer, right there in the darkness. I launched off my bed screaming. The moments running through the hallway and down the stairs are a blur. I mostly remember getting outside and running into the street, barefoot, screaming for help over and over. I must have looked insane, constantly looking back, expecting someone to be chasing me. I didn't stop until a man 2 houses down came outside, staring uncertainly. I begged to use his phone to call my boyfriend, but he insisted I call the police instead. I waited on his sidewalk, shaking and crying, until the police arrived. I told them everything, insisting I was 100% sure someone had been in the house. They drove me back to the duplex. My front door was still wide open as I'd left it. They found no signs of forced entry and asked if I'd unlocked it while running out. I had no memory of touching the lock, but I was so panicked I couldn't be sure. They checked every room, closet, and under the bed. No one was there. They knocked on the neighbor's door, but he wouldn't answer, and it seemed he wasn't home. Eventually, my boyfriend showed up and took me back to his place. I was still shaking hours later and don't remember sleeping the rest of the night. In the morning, I called my landlord, told him everything, and demanded to know who the neighbor was and if he had a history of strange behavior. I also said I needed to break the lease immediately. At first he pushed back, citing notice and paperwork, but after a day of calls, he agreed. My boyfriend came with me every time I returned to move my stuff. I refused to go alone. During those days, we tried knocking on the neighbor's door multiple times, but he never answered. It seemed no one lived there, yet there were packages at the door and a car in the driveway. I ended up moving back in with my parents until I found a new place. I still don't know if that neighbor was actually in my room that night, if someone got in without the police noticing, or if it was all in my head from the stress. Though the last seems unlikely, as it's usually clear what's real and what isn't. My landlord later told me the neighboring tenant moved out without a word. I don't know what really happened in that duplex.